Hello, everyone. Welcome. We're excited that so many of you could join us for today's event with Thomas Hübl, Cultivating Space, How to Turn Crisis into Wisdom in an Increasingly Complex World. And hello to the many Mystic Café members here with us today. It's great to have you here. I'm Digo, your tech host for today's event. And a few quick technical details before we get started. Closed captions are available. You can turn on closed captions by clicking the Show Captions CC button found at the bottom of your Zoom window. And if you don't see it, click More, and you'll find the show captions there. If you're finding us on YouTube, the closed captions cannot be turned off. If you have any technical questions today, please email our support team at onlinecoursesupport@thomashübl.com. If you're joining us on Zoom, you can submit written questions to Thomas by clicking on the Q&A button found at the bottom of your Zoom window. If you don't see it, select More, and then you'll find the Q&A button there. And thank you all for joining us today. Our host for this event is Anna Molitor. Anna is one of Thomas's senior students, and we'll introduce the event and bring on Thomas in a moment. And thank you for being with us today, Anna. Good to have you. Over to you.
Thanks so much, Digo. Hi, everybody. And again, welcome to our members and to everyone listening to this webinar with Thomas on the topic of cultivating space. Also, if you're listening to the recording later, we really appreciate you joining us today. And for those of you who are new to Thomas Hübl and his work, here's a brief introduction. Thomas Hübl is a teacher, speaker, founder of the Academy of Inner Science, and author of the book entitled Healing Collective Trauma, a process for integrating our intergenerational and cultural wounds, and the book entitled Attuned, Practicing Interdependence to Heal Our Trauma and Our World. Thomas works within the complexity of systems and cultural change, integrating the core insights of the great wisdom traditions and mysticism with the discoveries of science. For the last 20 years, he has led large-scale events and courses on the healing of collective trauma. The Mystic Café is where Thomas teaches monthly classes on mystical principles in a membership program. And this month in the Mystic Café, we'll engage in a 10-day challenge to more deeply practice cultivating space. We'll tell you more about how to join the Mystic Café and participate in that 10-day challenge later. But for now, thanks to those of you who submitted questions ahead of time, we received over 200 questions on this topic of cultivating space, how to turn crises into wisdom in an increasingly complex world. And Thomas will be addressing some of those questions during this event. So we may not get to your specific question, but we really hope and trust that you find value in all the questions being addressed and that you'll find insights in this hour together that we're going to be unfolding many of these questions. So welcome, Thomas.
Hello, Anna. I'm happy to be here.
Great. And maybe, Thomas, maybe you could start by speaking to us about what you mean by space, why it's so helpful to cultivate space as a practice.
Yeah, I think to start with, we can all look, we're all coming into this call from different life activities, and maybe we just take a moment to see when I ask myself, how much space do I have right now in myself? So how spacious do I feel? Does everything feel a bit tight? Everything seems a bit too much. I'm on the edge, I'm stressed, or we feel more relaxed, more open, more curious to engage in the conversation around space. So we can get immediately like a sense when we ask ourselves that question. When the more stressed and the more escalated and activated our stress level is, so the tighter things can become. And the more relaxed we are, we have more space, which means space is when you sit with a cup of tea or a cup of coffee, or you sit on the beach and you kind of reflect on your life. You take a walk. Space enables you to look at your life. Space enables you to digest. Sometimes we experience a lot and life is fast, and the speed of data makes our life faster and faster. So there's more and more stuff happening in a shorter time. And our psyche is same as our body needs time to digest food. We're not all the time eating. We're eating, digesting, and digestion leads to integration. So we're experiencing. Sometimes we need time to reflect on our experience, to make deeper sense of it. And as we do that, we digest our experience. And when we digest it, it gets integrated as learning into our overall self or our overall perspective. So space is actually a very important aspect of our life because it enables so many other functions. Space enables us to sleep well. Space enables us to digest our life experiences, as we said, well, which means it refreshes our nervous system. It empties the storage of data. So when we can't digest something immediately, we store it somewhere. And we need to empty those storages to keep our nervous system lively, vibrant, open, responsive. When we get too jammed up with stuff, so we actually cannot really experience new things because the older experiences don't allow us because we don't have space. So on the one hand, space is a way of living. Space is not something we have. Space is something we practice. And especially in the Western modern world, we get very trained to be in the activity or to look at objects in our awareness. It's like when you read a book, and as you read that book, how often, when you're really into the book, how often do you remember that you're looking at paper? But the paper is what allows for the letters. And the letters give words, sentences. When we read them, it animates a meaning. It animates an experience, an understanding. It transmits data. But all of it is kind of grounded in space. And that's why space is actually a very important aspect to embrace complexity. Because if the book hadn't all that paper, all those letters couldn't be composing kind of storyline or the content of the book. And that's true for our lives too. When our inner space is too tight, we cannot really embrace and be in the experience. And that gives me another, I think, important aspect, that because of the increase of data, like life becomes faster as we go through this hour here. And that means also the planet's shrinking on the one hand, because we become more and more a global village because of all that data circulating with the speed of light around the planet. And so we are more and more challenged to let the flow of that data go through us, which means we can ground the movement. But if there is trauma in my system, then the heightened speed of data, the heightened speed of light and of experience cannot ground itself. So it starts to create a pressure. And many people nowadays feel that pressure. We feel that's why there's such a need for mindfulness. There's such a need for slowing down. There's a need to go on retreat. There's a need for meditation. And there's a real need because we need to develop a skill to embrace that speed of data with a new inner capacity. And the capacity is not new, that exists thousands of years in wisdom traditions. But now we need it mainstream because life is getting faster and it hits inner tensions, stagnations. And where the speed of data hits stagnations, we produce heat, we produce inflammations, autoimmune disease. It creates a lot of side effects or symptoms, mental health issues. So when we cultivate space, we actually are saying that we, on a deeper level in our being, we say, oh, I understand that that which is aware that I feel my body is as important as feeling my body, is as important as my body. I'll say this again. That which is aware right now, that I feel my body, when I feel my body, something in me is aware that I feel my body. Awareness, when I look at what's actually aware, is space, inner space. Awareness, there are different levels of awareness. One level of awareness is that I'm aware of what I'm feeling. When I examine that awareness, then I see, actually data is arising in space. So data, when I feel my leg, when I feel my belly, when I feel my emotions, when I'm aware of my thoughts, all of that happens in an inner space of awareness. So it's arising. And my body sensations, my emotions, my thoughts are all movements. So there's awareness of movement all the time. We call it my internal or external sense perception. So when I'm aware of you, I'm also aware that I'm feeling you. When I'm aware of my body or what's happening in me, I'm aware that I feel myself. So space is equally important. We call it a conscious experience. That space is as important as the data, is as important as the body. So in an increasingly fast and complex world, there's a higher demand on the inner capacity to be aware of that world. And I'm sure many of us know when we get triggered, when we have arguments, when somebody says something, it stresses us, when we see war situations in the world, when we see the impact of climate disasters, when we feel maybe climate anxiety, or when we feel that there is no hope for the next generations. These are all a lot of inner movements that need an awareness to be, first of all, a conscious movement. Because as long as it's unconscious, it runs me. That's why I often say unconscious information or process is destiny. Because as long as it's unconscious, it's happening without me knowing. So it's running me. Conscious process has a choice. Unconscious process has no choice. The choice is in the past. And so when we generate more space in ourselves through an internal practice, because space is as important as the information, is as important as the physical reality, the body situations, then there is more conscious awareness of one's own inner process. And if we, as a community, understand how important space is, because it's so simple that it can easily be undervalued. But if we undervalue space, we undervalue consciousness. We don't give consciousness the space it needs for us to have a choice in life, for us to be aware of the process that's happening. And so when we look into our world, we see when we are facing what some people call the polycrisis, like a kind of a collection of different crises that accumulate and create more and more stress and more impact. We actually need communities that are cultivating space, because as we cultivate space, as also Otto Schama puts it beautifully, when in the theory U, in space or presence, the future is being born. So we become actually responsive and responsible towards the future, because we start listening to the future. And the future is not a later point in time, but a new level of consciousness. It's a new insight that can become a scientific breakthrough, that can become a startup, that can become a social innovation, that can become a creative process. So space is actually the hub where the past, undigested information, we said before, space is the capacity to digest our experience. Trauma healing needs space. If you go to a trauma therapist, if you go to a group, if you go to a healing space, there's space that enables the past, undigested information, to be integrated into now. That's why we could say history is not the past. History is sitting here speaking, is sitting here listening, is sitting here having this group experience. Integrated history is presence. Unintegrated history shows up between us as fears, aggression, shame, as all kinds of processes, insecurities, doubts, numbness, that affect the way we are together in presence. So unintegrated history is the past. Integrated history is the present capacity to live this life. And so space, again, is the hub where we can allow the past to catch up, where we can allow the movements, the stagnations, the unlived experiences, the suppressed experiences to come back and find a loving space that can embrace it, can digest it, can integrate that data and grow in perspective. That's what we call post-traumatic learning. But space, cultivating space, is also our responsibility towards the future. Because presence is the place where the future appears. Future never appears tomorrow. It always appears as a good insight when we have that good insight, not later. So there is a moment when the future takes place, when an insight comes in, when a great creative idea comes in, when I suddenly understand something deeper. Understand, alignment, grounding. And through our capacity to ground insights, we transform the world. And so cultivating space is, I think, a necessity in a faster and faster paced world. I think many people, many of us feel the need sometimes to slow down, to decompress and regulate our stress levels better, to find more practices that can help us to cultivate space, to consciously participate in a fast-paced world. But then there's one thing that, first of all, one thing that we need to discern. There's a difference between kind of being able to look at what's happening, but to be a bit dissociated or numb. Then I have the feeling, oh, I can witness what's happening, but I'm actually a bit separate from it. Or I feel that space saturates my experience. Space saturating my experience is being truly spacious. That's a conscious experience. Sometimes being dissociated also looks like I can witness something, but I'm actually not witnessing, I'm witnessing. Like I'm looking at something that is already overwhelming for me, but I manage to keep it at a distance. And I believe our world is full of distancing, and distancing creates polarization, or distancing is a function of fragmentation of the trauma response. And that's why we feel a lot of distance in the world, others somewhere, and we feel less global intimacy. And every violence, every polarization, every othering, every racism, every anti-Semitism, every violence against different genders or different populations in our communities just increase the societal distance and do not support societal intimacy. And intimacy means that the society is close to me, that it happens in the same space. It's spacious. So in my internal experience, I can check immediately what are the parts of society that are distant from me, what are the parts of society that are close to me. And if I don't just stay until that's given, but I keep examining distance and closeness, I begin to grow. I begin to less polarize and fragment and more include and transcend. So I begin to include polarities. I become a bigger space. Whatever, when this is my space, whatever is bigger than my space, I'm part of the polarization. When my space is bigger, when the internal space is bigger than the tension of a conflict, I actually begin to host a conflict. A friend of mine, William Ury, great mediator, says the power of this third side to a conflict is the power to embrace that conflict. Often the world's getting fragmented when there are conflicts, which means that power to be a space is getting lost. So global polarization is not an embrace of the conflict, it's the extension of the conflict. And being able to host the polarization is actually the beginning of a healing movement. That's why since we are living in we are calling it the polycrisis, there is another element that I think is very important for our time. And that is that often we are, especially in the West, we are hypnotized by individuals. But often what we say is that's a separate person. Individuation is not separation. Individuation is a process of forming an individual viewpoint in life. But when any one of us walks through the forest, where is nature? When I walk through the forest, nature is not just around me. Nature, Thomas is also nature. You are also nature. All of us are nature. But we might say, oh, nature is around me versus nature is through me. When I look at society, it's not all the other people. Society is through me. I'm also society. When I feel separate, then I look at society from that separate viewpoint. But that's not individuation. Individuation is a fluid relationship that goes through us, not stops here. So all the other people are society. Then we say, I'm also part of the society. Like if I take a cup or a glass and I put it in the cupboard, it's also there in the cupboard. But that's not how life works. Life is all of it. So I am an individual viewpoint, and I am the ecosystem, not I'm part of the ecosystem. I'm nature too. You are nature, we are nature. But it's important when we look at, for example, climate change, and we look at a lot of anxieties, climate anxieties that are coming up. We can say, oh, these are merely individual fears. Or we could say, what happens in a crisis, that the evolutionary impulse, the impulse of a system to change, let's say for a marriage, once there's a crisis in the marriage, many impulses to change have been suppressed by the trauma in the marriage. So the frozenness doesn't allow the new movement. And there's more and more pressure until one day the pressure breaks open. A war, the same. A war is a crisis where the evolution cannot take place and it breaks open. And then all that energy gets discharged and becomes a new level of trauma, because where does it go? It gets absorbed by the biosphere. So all the pressure that gets discharged lands as violence or whatever in us as trauma. So it's actually a repetitive cycle from one generation to the next. So and also when we look at climate change, so when stuff comes up in us, we could say, oh, that's a problem. How can I get rid of my climate fears or my climate anxiety or any other stuff that comes up in me? Or I can say, wow, something wants to detox itself to come into our and my awareness, to be digested, to be transformed, and to be part of evolution. So whatever is held down, a lot of collective trauma layers of hundreds of years of human life, actually want to detox themselves because they need to be digested and integrated for us to grow. But what we grow is the capacity to embrace complexity. Otherwise, complexity without development is overwhelming. But complexity in an evolving world is actually the creative challenge we need to express our evolution. And space, cultivating space, is an integral part of having enough awareness and having enough space to allow that detox to happen and not try to suppress it as a mistake. It's not a mistake. It's the ability of the biosphere to detox stuff that couldn't be detoxed before for the entire system to grow. So challenges, problems, difficulties we go through are actually signposts to growth. But often we think, oh, when I have a challenge or a problem, something is wrong. Versus, oh, when I have a challenge or a problem, there is something in me that needs to grow. So how can I engage it versus try to not have it? And work with it and see also what's my internal process that makes it hard for me to stay related to the challenge. And like that, we could say resilience is the capacity to stay related to challenging moments. What I said before, that maturity or resilience both are the capacity to stay related to the process of life, challenging moments, tensions, paradox, conflicts, and have the power to actually not fragment into polarization, but host the tension of the contradiction and turn this into growth. And that's why I believe that something as simple as space, because our complex minds might disregard space as something too simple. It looks like, oh, the meaning of the book has not so much to do with the paper, but it does. The paper is as important, or your iPad is as important as the letters, is as important as the writing of the book. They're all important. Space is as important as my perception of my body or my mind or the world, is as important as the world or my physical body. So they're inherently interwoven, and together it creates a conscious experience of my body, a conscious experience of you, conscious experience of the world. And that's why I believe that as communities and as individuals, cultivating space, because relating, building a healthy relational ecosystem with family, with friends, colleagues, people in our society, if we create healthy relational spaces, and healthy doesn't mean that they're only harmonious. Healthy means that there is a mutual commitment to stay related in the beautiful moments and in the challenging moments. And that relational ecosystem is an extension of space. And we all can feel that when somebody really listens to us, when we are distressed, and somebody is really relating, attuned with us, honestly listening, then that's an extension of our own inner space. Sometimes when we are distressed, we feel a lack of space. By sharing and communicating that with somebody else, it opens the space again. I can feel that my stress level is dropping, that I start to digest my experience as I share, become maybe more aware of my inner process, and space is expanding. And that's why in families, in organizations, in our society at large, of course, in ourselves, cultivating space is an important aspect for well-being and health. And I think had we more capacities to cultivate space in our life, we would have less mental and physical illnesses. We would have a more functional societal process. And most probably we would have more capacity to innovate and turn the difficulties of the past into presence and become able to respond to the future, or be responsive to how the future, the next generations, are calling us. And that at first sounds a bit strange, because how can the next generations call us? But in the understanding of vertical development, we see that not only does the past inform me, also the future informs me. And that I am actually the interplay of the past and the future in this present moment. And that's why having a practice, and maybe we'll do for a moment a short practice that we also have a little bit of an experiential touchdown of space, and then we will go to so many questions. As Anna said before, a few hundred questions came in already, so we want to give space to that. We want to cultivate the space for the questions. But before that, let's check in with yourself when you listen to the cultivation of space. So when you look at your own life, what's the balance in your life between activity and the space to embrace the activity? Do you feel often overloaded? Or disengaged? Both? Do you have moments where you feel spacious? And if so, how does a spacious moment feel? which areas of your life do you feel you, I often call it, you're a gardener of space. You listen to the deep need of your being to have space. For some of us, it's when we listen to music, some of us when we meditate, some of us when we take a walk in nature, some of us when we do sports, when we are in deep relationship, many other things, many other practices. And then to see what happens if you take a couple of breaths, and every time you exhale, you allow your exhale to be a bit slower, a bit longer. And then another exhalation, slower, a bit longer. And every time you exhale, connect a bit more to your physical body sensations. Notice where is your body warm right now, open, comfortable, pleasant, pulsing, streaming, flowing. And still, the exhalation takes you a bit deeper to notice more sensations. And through your sensations, to also notice a bit of the ground underneath you. You get a sense of the ground underneath you. When we are too stressed, sometimes it's harder to feel the ground. It's an upward movement. When we can relax, it's easier to feel the ground. Just respect both. Don't override the stress if there is. Kind of gently embrace sensations of stress if you feel them in your body. And as you notice your inner sensations, you can check in with that which is aware that you feel yourself. I feel my body. I'm aware that I feel my body. I notice awareness. Don't not to think about what's aware, to notice directly what's aware. Something in me is aware of perception, data, experience. And I notice that awareness. And within that more contemplative space, can see if there's anything, even if it's short, 5 minutes here, 10 minutes there, that you can insert in your own daily life flow as a practice of space. Sometimes to take a walk, listen to some music, to listen to your breath and your body sensations as we did it now. Or anything else that helps you to balance the activity, the speed of life, the complexity of your daily life. And insert moments of space. Maybe to start a regular practice, 5 or 10 minutes every morning, every evening before you go to bed. To connect to your breath, to your body, to let the day digest itself in you. And through you, which is also a beautiful practice to support your sleep, to regenerate, recuperate, self-heal. And then let's slowly take a couple of deeper breaths and slowly come back to the room. Maybe look a bit around, orient yourself in the room, and let's give some time to at least some of the questions that came in.
Yeah, thank you so much, Thomas, and also for this practice. We're together. We kind of got to taste some of the actual practice, and so that partially answers some of the questions a bit. But I wanted to just read a couple of maybe 3 or 4 questions that came in that are in a similar category, and that I think many people might have bits of questions like this in the space. So I'll share them and then just invite you to respond to what you hear in that. So Catherine brings, as a sensitive person who absorbs a lot and needs longer to process the stimuli, how do I manage to digest the ongoing events of the world without overwhelming myself, but also without isolating myself? Which you spoke a bit about that distancing. Maria says, it's difficult for me to understand how to stay present with uncomfortable emotions and thoughts, or when someone's talking and I'm being triggered, is focusing on my breath a distraction or on the sensations of my body? Should I listen to my thoughts or the other person's words, even if they're not beneficial for me? Deborah speaks to being triggered so suddenly and strongly that her emotions and anxiety can create a barrier that's difficult to break through with calming techniques. She says, is there some way to stifle the emotions or anxiety before they create that barrier, or in effect to stay more even throughout the day? And then Andrea says also, she's so grateful for your teachings, and her question today is about how the scale and volume of suffering in the world is making it much more challenging than usual for her to self-regulate and calm her nervous system. She says, I practice meditation, spend time on the land, do breath work, daily gratitude practice, I participate in ceremony as often as I can. And still, it's so difficult to keep my heart open and not experience intense anxiety every day. What practices do you find most effective in restoring and maintaining groundedness and equilibrium in times like these? So you've spoken a bit to that, but maybe just some specifics here that are coming up for our community.
Yeah, so first of all, I think when we look at our emotions, the first or an important exploration is also, how am I holding, or what's my relationship to my emotions? Because for some of us, we are looking at our emotions already with a bit of, that shouldn't be there that way. And I'm supposed to be like this. but now I feel like that. And so sometimes that kind of exploration, what's actually the lens that I look through when I look at myself, we'll find out that many of us carry like a self-pathologizing lens inside. Something is not okay with me when I feel like that. And that builds in some kind of resistance towards those emotions. And then they get they start looping. They come back again and again and again and again and again. And so examining if I pathologize myself for what's arising in me, or if I begin to open a space that says, okay, I want to get to know, I want to be more curious, I want to explore, I want to feel into, I want to deepen my relationship to myself. So that's important, because sometimes the pathologizing lens creates looping cycles. So emotions that come back again and again and again. It seems like there's nothing changing. So the next step is, how often do I try alone? Or am I also reaching out with the things that really bother me? Am I creating for myself relational relationships or relational network that can help me to co-process that just by listening to me? And sometimes being able to share something is much more beneficial than to try to resolve it alone. And so the next step is, how much support systems do I have that I can turn towards when it gets intense? Of course, one aspect of support system is when I really feel often overwhelmed, then it's good to talk to a therapist or some professional that can help me develop skills and practices or also integration processes, go with me through integration processes. That's another step. And when we look at the world, so regulation is not necessarily like isolating myself. It can lead to but isolating myself doesn't mean that I have a regulated relationship to the world. Isolating myself is that I'm on the one side of the pendulum and being completely exposed and all the time in the overwhelm of news and the world and everything is on the other side of the pendulum. But there's something in the middle, which is a healthy regulation, means that I know how much I can engage. And I know also when it's becoming too much for me, I'm regulating myself by taking in less information. And for some of us, bits of information are already enough given our current process. And for other people, they can expose themselves. But it doesn't mean if somebody reads news every day and they look like pretty regulated, that this needs to be the same for me. That's not my role model. That's another person's experience. And I don't compare myself to this. I'm looking what is actually the place where I can still absorb, where I can still be informed. And that's an important word, because information means that I have a form, I have a form, a representation of the world in me. When I overload myself with information, I have no form of the world in me. All my defense mechanisms pop up, and then I feel a distance to the world, or I feel completely overwhelmed. And then I'm not anymore informed. I'm actually completely reactive in that state. So that's why the dose, the amount of how I can be informed, and if I feel that I'm naturally very empathic and I need time to digest, so I need to find a lifestyle that helps me first to be regulated given my sensitivity, and also be willing to look if it's really my sensitivity that gets overloaded, or that I need to work on my roots. I need to work on my grounding to strengthen my grounding so that my sensitivity has more of a base to ground itself. It's like information, like electricity, goes in and down. If it cannot go down and it hits all kinds of trauma layers in me, then I'm not overwhelmed by the information that I read. I'm overwhelmed by the bell that starts ringing in me when I read that information. Because some people say, oh, I'm overwhelmed by the world. And I would say, no, we are overwhelmed because what's happening in the world triggers a lot of fears that we have inside. So then, okay, what do I need to work on this? Because that's also part of my evolution. I'm living in this time. So what do I need to create for myself that I can work with what this time brings up in me in a better way? And that's the ability to respond. It's responsible to look, it's not responsible that I can be exposed to everything. It's responsible to look what I need to be able to grow through my challenges. Doesn't mean that I shouldn't have any challenges. No. It means that I know what I need to grow through my challenges. And that's, I think, the important ability to respond. For example, when a therapist has a difficulty with a client, that's not irresponsible. That's coming up for many therapists. But that I take, if I don't find clarity myself, what happened there, that I go to a supervision, that's responsible. It means not that I shouldn't have that difficulty, but what happens when I go through the difficulty and how I take it further into growth. And so the responsibility is with the growth, that I can take it into like a growth movement. And that says, okay, we all go through challenges. And the third station is there is pain in the world. When we look into the world, we see painful things, and that painful things register in us as pain is also healthy. That we sometimes cry or grieve, and that certain situations touch us. That's not overwhelm. That's a natural feeling that my humanity resonates with the humanity of somebody else, a group, a situation, whatever, an incident. And that we are more open to be touched, that's also part of being healthy, because that brings up care, that brings up responsiveness. Responsiveness doesn't come just out of detachment and, oh, I'm so cool, I can handle everything. No, some things reach us, and because they reach us, we care and we step into a new action, for example. But if I'm just overwhelmed, then it's not that I just feel what's happening in the world. What's happening in the world touches a prior overwhelm in me, and that's my inner work to do. And that we find, either we have already or we find for ourselves environments of healing, ecosystems. We need ecosystemic healing spaces. And the more the world will be challenged by the polycrisis or by polycrisis, we need more collective healing spaces. That's our job to develop. And because it's responsible, once I know the trauma creates a repetition compulsion, we cannot just move on. Just trying to forget the past and get into the future is not working. So we need something new. Responsibility means I got it. We cannot run away from our legacies. We cannot run away from our collective legacies, our collective trauma heritage. we have to create environments where we can heal collectively to stop the repetition compulsion and offer the next generation a bigger world than the one we found. That's responsibility.
Thank you so much, Thomas. Just also like feeling the quality of the space as you speak to this and of our shared space here. And you offered so much richness into this conversation, kind of unfolding the ecosystemic way that we can be with this together, also really highlighting the healing communities, the aspect of practicing together as well. So yeah, we can say, I'm going to say more also about how to deepen this practice and to come more into it together in the Mystic Cafe and also in the 10-day challenge that's coming up. And just really inviting you, if you feel moved, to join us and to know that the Mystic Cafe anyway is a space that we receive these teachings with Thomas. We really contemplate and practice them. We have a member space once a month also to come together where we just practice deeply with each other and the questions that are coming up each month. And that's a really beautiful ongoing practice space within Thomas's work. And so thank you so much, Thomas, for this and just sitting in the depth. Yeah. Thank you. That's feeling the depth of what also opens in the transmission. If we can feel that we're hearing the concepts, but also something's happening that's not just in our conscious mind and in our awareness. There's something happening in the space, and that we can notice that together as we finish the call here. And Digo, I believe you have more to share with us about how we can join Mystic Cafe and be involved in this upcoming challenge. So I'd love to invite you back on to share that.
Thank you, Anna. And Thomas. Yeah. And thank you, everyone who is listening and watching. If you're interested in joining us, I just want to let you know a few details. You can also hop over to mysticcafeonline.com to get this information. The 10-day challenge will begin with a 90-minute live opening event with Thomas on Sunday, January 21st. That'll be at 11:30 a.m. LA, 2:30 p.m. New York, 8:30 p.m. Berlin. And the 10-day challenge is only available to members of the Mystic Cafe, and there are two ways to become a member. You can sign up for the monthly membership program at $37, or you can sign up and save with the annual plan and get 2 months free that way. Once you're a member, you'll enjoy monthly live 90-minute sessions with Thomas, monthly member gatherings hosted by our host today, Anna Molitor. And plus, there's an extensive and rich library of recordings from Thomas that, again, are available only to members. And of course, we'll be exploring this wonderful concept of the cultivating space, something that we can all use in the new 10-day challenge. We warmly invite you to all of this to join us for the Mystic Cafe, the 10-day challenge, and you can get all the details again and sign up at mysticcafeonline.com. If you're already a member of the Mystic Cafe, we'll start the new 10-day challenge at our next session on Sunday, January 21st. And just please look out in your email for that link. And I want to thank everyone for listening and participating through your presence today. And we'd love to have you at the Mystic Cafe. Bye for now.